I'll die in 30 days without a heart transplant. A lonely heiress whispers this shocking truth to a struggling single dad, but when his response changes everything, the countdown to her final days turns into a fight for love, hope, and survival. Will she find a new heart before time runs out? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. In the stark fluorescent light of Dr. Harrison's private office, Olivia Sterling sat perfectly straight in her Italian leather chair, her manicured fingers gripping its arms. The doctor's words seemed to echo in slow motion, each syllable striking like a hammer against her consciousness. Without a heart transplant, you have approximately 30 days. Dr. Harrison's voice was gentle but firm, his weathered face showing genuine concern behind his wire-rimmed glasses. Olivia blinked slowly, her pewter gray silk blouse suddenly feeling too tight around her neck. 30 days, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt foreign on her tongue, like speaking a language she'd never learned. The doctor leaned forward across his mahogany desk, his hands clasped together. Miss Sterling, I know this is difficult to process. Your condition has deteriorated faster than we anticipated. The medications aren't working as effectively as we'd hoped. She nodded mechanically, her mind struggling to grasp the reality of the situation. The office around her, with its pristine white walls adorned with medical certificates and abstract art, had always represented safety, control, the power of money to fix any problem. Now it felt like a prison cell where she'd just received her sentence. What about the transplant list? Olivia asked, proud that her voice didn't shake. Surely with my resources. Dr. Harrison shook his head slowly. Even with your status, there are protocols we must follow. Your brother Thomas, as your medical proxy, would need to approve. Thomas? The name came out sharp, like broken glass. Olivia hadn't spoken to her brother in 15 years, not since their bitter fight over their father's estate. He has to approve? Yes, Miss Sterling. It's a legal requirement, given the arrangements your father put in place before his passing. The doctor pulled out several forms from a folder. We can start the process immediately, but we'll need his signature. Olivia's perfectly composed facade cracked slightly. A small tremor ran through her hand as she reached for her designer purse. I understand, she said, though she didn't understand at all. How could her life depend on the brother who'd grown to hate her? Outside the medical building, her driver James held the door of the black Mercedes open. Olivia slid into the cool leather interior, her movements automatic after decades of the same routine. But today, everything felt different. The familiar comfort of luxury felt hollow, meaningless. Home, Miss Sterling? James asked, his eyes meeting hers in the rearview mirror. Yes, she replied, then added softly, the scenic route, please. As the car glided through the streets of the city, Olivia watched the world outside her tinted windows. People hurried along the sidewalks, laughing, talking on phones, living their lives. A young mother pushed a stroller, bending down to adjust her child's hat. An elderly couple walked hand in hand, sharing what looked like an ice cream cone. 30 days. The words kept echoing in her mind. 30 more times to watch the sunset. 30 more morning coffees. 30 more nights in her empty mansion. The Mercedes turned onto the private drive leading to Sterling Estate, the wheels crunching on the perfectly maintained gravel. The house loomed before her, a massive Victorian mansion that had been in her family for generations. Its windows gleamed in the fading daylight, but they seemed to stare back at her like empty eyes. James opened her door, and Olivia stepped out, her heels clicking against the stone steps. The grand entrance door swung open silently, Martha, her housekeeper, always watching for her return. Would you like dinner served in the dining room tonight, Miss Sterling? Martha asked, taking Olivia's coat. No, thank you, I'm not hungry. Olivia's voice sounded distant to her own ears. She walked through the foyer, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. The walls were lined with portraits, generations of Sterlings, looking down at her with painted eyes. Her father's portrait, the largest and most recent, dominated the main wall. Augustus Sterling's stern face seemed to judge her even now, years after his death. Olivia stopped before it, studying the familiar features. The same steel-gray eyes she'd inherited, the proud tilt of his chin, the expensive suit painted with perfect detail. He'd built an empire, expanded the family fortune, and left behind a legacy of wealth and influence. But standing there now, with 30 days left to live, Olivia couldn't remember a single moment of warmth or genuine affection from him. Her gaze drifted to the portrait beside her mother, Elizabeth Sterling, beautiful, poised, and equally distant. She died when Olivia was 12, leaving behind nothing but a collection of designer dresses and a daughter who never learned how to be loved. Moving down the line of portraits, she found the one of Thomas and herself as teenagers. They stood stiffly in formal wear, not touching, not smiling. Even then, the distance between them had been growing. Now, that same brother held her life in his hand. Olivia's legs felt weak. She sank onto the antique bench in the hall, its silk cushion offering little comfort. The portrait seemed to loom over her. Generations of Sterlings who had lived and died in wealth, but perhaps never really lived at all. A sound escaped her throat, something between a laugh and a sob. All this wealth, all this legacy, and what did she have to show for it? Empty rooms filled with priceless artifacts. Staff who called her Miss Sterling and disappeared into the shadows. Bank accounts full enough to last 10 lifetimes, but not a single person to share them with. The grandfather clock in the corner struck 9, its deep chimes resonating through the hollow halls. 30 days. Each chime seemed to count down the precious time she had left. Olivia wrapped her arms around herself, feeling cold despite the perfectly regulated temperature of the house. "Will there be anything else, Miss Sterling?" Martha's voice came softly from the doorway. Olivia looked up at her housekeeper of 20 years, a woman who probably knew more about her daily habits than any family member ever had. "No, Martha, you can go home for the night." Martha nodded and retreated silently, leaving Olivia alone with her ancestors' portraits and the weight of her revelation. She had spent her entire life maintaining the Sterling legacy, living up to the family name, and for what? To die alone in this beautiful prison of wealth and status? The irony of it struck her hard. She had everything money could buy, but not the one thing she needed now: love, family, connection. The portrait stared down at her. Generation after generation of Sterlings, who had built this fortress of wealth, but perhaps had never known real happiness either. In the growing darkness of the hall, Olivia Sterling, heiress to one of the largest fortunes in the state, finally admitted to herself just how poor she truly was. Morning sunlight filtered through the towering windows of Olivia Sterling's mansion, but she hadn't slept. The diagnosis from yesterday kept replaying in her mind like a broken record. 30 days. The words felt both impossibly short and achingly long. She changed from her silk pajamas into a simple beige sweater and slacks, probably the plainest outfit she owned. Today, she couldn't bear to put on her usual armor of designer clothes. What was the point? The mansion's silence pressed in on her. Every tick of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to mock her remaining time. She had to get out, had to move, had to breathe different air. "I'm going out, Edwards," she called to her butler, her voice shakier than she'd intended. No need for the car. Walking through the iron gates of her estate, Olivia found herself meandering down unfamiliar streets. The morning crowd bustled around her, mothers pushing strollers, shop owners setting up their displays, teens rushing to school. All these people with their ordinary lives stretched endlessly before them. She envied even the harried-looking woman juggling grocery bags and a crying toddler. The quaint downtown area was a stark contrast to her usual haunts. Here, the buildings were weathered but well-loved, with hand-painted signs and window boxes full of spring flowers. She passed a small bakery, the scent of fresh bread making her realize she hadn't eaten breakfast. When was the last time she'd actually felt hungry? That's when she saw it. The Pine Grove Community Center. The red brick building looked tired, its paint peeling around the edges, but there was something welcoming about it. A colorful banner hung crookedly across the entrance. After-school programs. All welcome. Olivia stopped, recognition dawning. 6 months ago, her accountant had suggested this place as a tax write-off. She'd signed the check without a second thought. Now, she found herself drawn to the worn concrete steps. Through the glass doors, she could see children's artwork decorating the walls. Construction paper, butterflies, and finger-painted trees created a cheerful patchwork. The lobby was simple but clean, with mismatched furniture that somehow worked together. A small girl's voice rang out, clear as a bell. "Daddy, look! I drew our house!" Olivia's gaze followed the sound. A young girl, perhaps 10 years old, was bouncing excitedly beside a tall man who was hanging artwork on a bulletin board. The child's brown curls danced with her movement, and her blue eyes sparkled with pride. The man, presumably her father, turned from his task, and Olivia caught her breath. He wasn't traditionally handsome, but there was something striking about his face. Laugh lines crinkled around kind eyes, and his smile as he looked at his daughter was full of genuine warmth. "That's beautiful, Grace," he said, his voice rich and gentle. "Why don't you add it to the wall?" The girl, Grace, carefully selected a pushpin from a small container. As she stretched up on tiptoe to hang her drawing, she noticed Olivia standing in the doorway. Instead of shying away, Grace's face lit up with a smile that seemed to brighten the entire room. "Hello, are you here for the art show?" Olivia found herself stepping further into the lobby, drawn by the child's openness. "Art show?" The man turned, noticing her presence. "We're putting together a small exhibition of the children's artwork," he explained, wiping his hands on his jeans before extending one. "I'm Daniel Carter, the center's handyman, and this is my daughter, Grace." "Olivia Sterling," she replied automatically, taking his hand. His grip was firm but gentle, his palm calloused from work. She couldn't remember the last time she'd shaken someone's hand without it being a business transaction. Grace was already pulling another drawing from a folder. "I made this one yesterday," she said, holding it out to Olivia. "It's a garden with butterflies and a rainbow. Do you like butterflies?" The drawing was exactly what you'd expect from a 10-year-old, simple shapes, bright colors, and a sun with a smiling face in the corner. But there was something about it that touched Olivia deeply. Perhaps it was the pure joy evident in every crayon stroke, or the way Grace offered it so freely, without expectation. Yes, I do like butterflies." Olivia managed, her throat suddenly tight. She found herself kneeling down to Grace's level, something she couldn't remember doing with any child before. "This is lovely. You're quite the artist." Grace beamed, then looked at her father questioningly. At his slight nod, she held out the drawing. "You can have it if you want. I can make another one." Olivia's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the paper. Such a simple gift, yet it felt more precious than any of the expensive artwork hanging in her mansion. "Thank you, Grace. That's very kind of you." Daniel watched this exchange with gentle curiosity, his head tilted slightly. "Would you like some coffee, Miss Sterling? We just made a fresh pot in the kitchen." For the first time since yesterday's diagnosis, Olivia felt something other than despair. A tiny spark of warmth, as delicate as a butterfly's wing but undeniably real. She looked at the drawing in her hands, then at Grace's hopeful face, and finally at Daniel's kind eyes. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the community center's worn linoleum floor as Olivia Sterling pushed open the glass door. Her heels clicked against the tiles, echoing in the quiet hallway. She clutched her designer handbag, inside which she'd placed her checkbook like a shield. The familiar scent of coffee and something warm, possibly cookies, wafted from the main room. Following the aroma, she found Daniel Carter arranging folding chairs around several tables, pushed together to form one long surface. He looked up, surprise flickering across his friendly face. "Mrs. Sterling, Grace will be thrilled you came back." "Please, call me Olivia." She shifted her weight, uncomfortable with the formality. "I wanted to discuss making a donation to help with the center's programs." Daniel straightened up, wiping his hands on his jeans. "That's very kind of you, but you picked an interesting time. We're about to have our weekly community potluck. Nothing fancy, just neighbors sharing a meal together." "Oh, I shouldn't intrude then." Olivia took a step back, but Daniel's warm chuckle stopped her. "Nonsense. You'd be more than welcome to join us." Grace made her famous mac and cheese. His eyes crinkled at the corners. "Well, famous in our household at least." Before Olivia could protest, the door burst open and Grace bounded in, carrying a foil-covered casserole dish. "Dad, Mrs. Rodriguez is bringing her enchiladas and Aunt Liv." The girl's face lit up upon seeing Olivia. "You came back." The nickname caught Olivia off guard, warming something deep in her chest. She hadn't been called anything but Mrs. Sterling in years. More people started filtering in, carrying dishes and warm greetings. Mrs. Rodriguez, a grandmother with silver-streaked hair, set down a steaming pan of enchiladas. The Mitchell twins brought potato salad. Mr. Cooper, the retired mailman, contributed his world-famous cornbread. "Please stay," Daniel said quietly, noticing Olivia's hesitation. "There's always room for one more." Something in his voice, the genuine warmth, the complete lack of agenda, made her nod. I'd like that." Grace immediately pulled her toward the serving table. "You have to try everything, especially Dad's chicken. He makes it with special herbs from our garden." The next hour passed in a blur of introductions, laughter, and more food than Olivia had seen outside of catered events. But this was different. Every dish came with a story, every person with a warm smile and genuine interest in conversation. She found herself seated between Grace and Daniel, her plate piled with home-cooked dishes that put her private chef's creations to shame. The little girl chattered about school, her art projects, and how her dad was teaching her carpentry. "She's already better at birdhouses than me," Daniel admitted with pride. "Dad, That's not true. Grace giggled. Remember when I made that crooked one? It had character, Daniel winked. The birds loved it. Olivia watched their easy affection, the way they finished each other's sentences and shared private jokes. It made her chest ache with a different kind of pain than her failing heart. After dinner, as people began clearing tables, Olivia insisted on helping. Daniel tried to wave her off, but she picked up a stack of plates anyway. Please, let me do something useful. They fell into a rhythm in the small kitchen. Daniel washing, Olivia drying, while Grace wrapped leftovers for people to take home. The domesticity of it felt foreign yet somehow right. Thank you, Olivia said softly, setting aside another dried plate. I can't remember the last time I enjoyed a meal so much. You're welcome here anytime. Daniel passed her a sudsy bowl. We're not fancy, but we're real. The simple sincerity in his voice cracked something inside her. Maybe it was the warmth of the evening, the lingering comfort of good food and better company, or just the weight of her secret becoming too heavy to bear alone. I'm dying. The words slipped out before she could stop them. She gripped the counter, avoiding his gaze. Without a heart transplant, I have less than 30 days. The steady stream of water from the faucet stopped. In the sudden quiet, Olivia could hear cheerful goodbyes from the main room, oblivious to the bomb she'd just dropped in the kitchen. I'm sorry, she backpedaled, mortified. I shouldn't have. Then let's live these 30 days as if they're all that matters. She looked up, expecting pity or discomfort in Daniel's expression. Instead, she found steady determination and something that looked remarkably like hope. What? 30 days is enough time to make memories that last forever. He dried his hands on a dish towel, turning to face her fully. Enough time to make every moment count. Olivia stared at him, this man who'd known her for less than 2 days, who was offering not sympathy but a challenge, a chance to live rather than just wait to die. Before she could respond, Grace bounced back into the kitchen with an empty casserole dish. Dad, can we have ice cream now? Morning sunlight filtered through the oak trees as Olivia stood at the edge of Henderson Park, feeling oddly out of place in her cream-colored silk blouse and tailored slacks. She watched Grace Carter bouncing on her toes near a red checkered blanket spread across the grass, while Daniel unloaded a wicker basket from his weathered pickup truck. Miss Sterling, you came! Grace's voice rang with pure delight as she raced over, her braids swinging. I was worried you wouldn't find us, but Daddy said you would. Olivia's throat tightened at the child's earnest welcome. Yes. Well, your directions were very precise. She glanced down at the crumpled paper where Grace had carefully drawn a map during yesterday's potluck, complete with stick figures and a very detailed tree that indeed matched the gnarled oak they stood under. Come sit with us. Grace tugged at Olivia's hand. Daddy made his famous chicken salad sandwiches, and I helped with the cookies. Daniel looked up from arranging paper plates, his eyes crinkling with warmth. Grace, remember what we said about personal space? Oh, sorry. Grace released Olivia's hand but continued beaming. I'm just excited you're here. Olivia's designer shoes sank slightly into the soft grass as she made her way to the blanket. She hesitated, unsure how to gracefully lower herself onto the ground in her expensive outfit. Daniel seemed to sense her discomfort. Here, he said, pulling a folding canvas chair from behind the truck. Thought this might come in handy. Thank you, Olivia murmured, touched by his thoughtfulness. She settled into the chair, watching as Grace arranged plastic cups with careful precision. Lemonade? Daniel offered, holding up a thermos. Fair warning, Grace was in charge of adding the sugar. It's perfect, Grace protested. I only put in 3 extra scoops this time. A small smile tugged at Olivia's lips. I'd love some, thank you. The lemonade was indeed sweet enough to make her teeth ache, but something about Grace's proud expression as she watched Olivia take that first sip made it taste wonderful. Daniel passed around sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. Olivia couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten anything that hadn't been prepared by her private chef. The chicken salad was surprisingly good, fresh and homemade, with just the right amount of crunch from celery and pecans. Do you like it? Grace asked, her face serious. Daddy lets me help mix everything together. It's delicious, Olivia said honestly. Much better than what my cook makes. Grace's eyes widened. You have a cook? Like in a restaurant? Grace, Daniel warned gently. No, it's all right, Olivia said. She looked at Grace's curious face and felt something inside her soften. Yes, I have a cook. But sometimes I think that makes me miss out on the important things, like helping make the food yourself. A warm breeze rustled through the trees as they ate. Olivia found herself relaxing, despite her initial awkwardness. She watched a pair of squirrels chase each other around a nearby trunk while Grace chatted about her science project on butterflies. "Want to see me cartwheel?" Grace asked suddenly, jumping up from the blanket. "I've been practicing all week." Before anyone could respond, she was off, turning wobbly cartwheels across the grass. Her infectious giggles filled the air. "Careful near that tree," Daniel called out, then turned to Olivia with an apologetic smile. "She's got endless energy." "She's wonderful," Olivia said softly, surprising herself with how much she meant it. As the afternoon wore on, they walked to the small pond where Grace insisted on naming all the ducks. Daniel told stories about his carpentry projects, his quiet passion for the craft evident in every word. Olivia found herself sharing memories of her own father teaching her to sail, stories she hadn't thought about in years. The sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. They returned to their picnic spot for cookies, slightly misshapen but warm with chocolate chips. "Daddy, show Miss Sterling your funny face," Grace urged, chocolate smudged on her chin. "The one you make when you taste something super sour." Daniel groaned good-naturedly. "I don't think Miss Sterling needs to see that." "Please?" Grace batted her eyelashes dramatically. "It's hilarious." "Oh, go on, Mr. Carter," Olivia found herself saying. "I'm quite curious now." Daniel sighed in mock defeat, then scrunched up his face in an exaggerated grimace that made him look like a startled owl. Grace collapsed in giggles, and to Olivia's surprise, a laugh bubbled up from deep inside her, real and unreserved, something she hadn't experienced in years. The sound of her own laughter startled her. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this light, this free. Looking at Grace's delighted face and Daniel's kind eyes, Olivia felt an ache in her chest that had nothing to do with her failing heart. This was what she'd been missing. Not the grand parties or expensive dinners, but simple moments filled with genuine joy. Grace snuggled against her father's side, still giggling. "See, I told you it was funny." Olivia watched them together, the easy affection between father and daughter, and felt a profound longing sweep through her. This was what family looked like. Not the cold formality of her childhood home or the empty halls of her mansion, but this warm, messy, wonderful connection. The click of Olivia's heels echoed through the marble foyer of her mansion as she entered, her heart still light from the afternoon's picnic. The warmth of those precious hours with Daniel and Grace lingered like a comfortable embrace. She hadn't expected such simple pleasures, watching Grace chase butterflies, sharing Daniel's homemade sandwiches, feeling the grass beneath her fingers to fill her with such joy. But her contentment shattered the moment she stepped into her living room. There, in the shadows cast by her crystal chandelier, stood Richard Sterling. Her brother's tall figure was as imposing as ever in his perfectly pressed charcoal suit, his silver hair catching the dim light. "Hello, sister." His voice held all the warmth of winter frost. "I see you've been socializing with the common folk." Olivia's spine stiffened. "What are you doing here, Richard? Dr. Harrison called me." Richard moved toward her desk, picking up a silver frame holding a photo of their parents. "As your medical proxy, he felt obligated to inform me of your situation. That's private medical information." Olivia's hands trembled slightly, but she kept her voice steady. Richard's laugh was sharp and hollow. "Private? Nothing in this family is private, Olivia. You should know that by now." He set the frame down with deliberate care. "I've already spoken with the Transplant board. You won't be listed." The words hit Olivia like a physical blow. "You? What? Come now, sister. Did you really think you deserved another chance? After everything you've done?" Richard's eyes narrowed. "After how you turned mother and father against me? I never," Olivia's voice caught, "I never turned them against you. They loved us both." "Loved us both?" Richard's voice rose. "They left you controlling interest in the foundation. You, who never showed any business sense, who wanted to give our money away to every charity case that crossed your path." Olivia wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the chill despite the warm evening. "Is that what this is about? The foundation? This is about justice." Richard straightened his already immaculate tie. "You've wasted enough of our family's legacy. I won't let you waste a perfectly good heart too. I'm your sister," Olivia whispered, her voice breaking. "Your own flesh and blood." "Blood?" Richard's laugh was cruel. "Blood didn't matter when you supported father's decision to keep me off the board. Blood didn't matter when you sided with mother about my divorce. Why should it matter now?" Tears threatened, but Olivia blinked them back. She thought of Grace's innocent smile, of Daniel's quiet strength. "You can't do this." "I already have." Richard pulled a thick envelope from his jacket. "These papers give me full control over your medical decisions. Dr. Harrison agreed it was best, given your emotional state. Emotional state? Olivia's voice shook. I'm dying, Richard. Without that transplant, then perhaps you should have thought about that before betraying your family. He dropped the envelope on her desk. Goodbye, sister. I trust you'll spend your remaining time reflecting on your choices. Richard's footsteps echoed across the marble floor, followed by the heavy thud of the front door closing. Only then did Olivia's legs give way. She sank to the Persian rug, her body racked with sobs. The crystal perfection of her mansion seemed to mock her now. What good were the antique furnishings, the priceless art, the designer clothes? They couldn't buy her what she needed most: time, hope, love. The word caught in her mind, bringing with it Grace's gap-toothed smile as she'd shared her peanut butter sandwich. Daniel's gentle eyes as he'd listened to her fears without judgment. The way they'd made room for her on their picnic blanket, as if she'd always belonged there. Olivia pressed her hands to her chest, feeling her failing heart beat beneath them. Richard might have the power to deny her a transplant, but he couldn't take away the gift she'd received today, the knowledge that somewhere in this world, two people had shown her real kindness without asking anything in return. Her tears slowed. She was still sitting on the floor, but her breathing had steadied. On the wall above her, the stern faces of her parents stared down from their portrait. What would they think of Richard's cruelty? Of her own desperate longing for connection? The afternoon sun slanted through her windows, catching the crystal vase on her coffee table. Inside it were the wildflowers Grace had picked for her, already slightly wilted but still beautiful in their imperfection, like the love she'd glimpsed today, not polished and proper like everything else in her life, but real and warm and true. Olivia touched one of the delicate petals. She might have only days left, but she wouldn't spend them drowning in Richard's bitterness. She would hold on to the memory of Grace's laughter, of Daniel's compassionate words. Then let's live these 30 days as if they're all that matters. Because maybe, just maybe, they did. The morning sun barely penetrated the heavy clouds as Olivia's car pulled into the community center's parking lot. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel, Richard's cruel words from the night before still echoing in her mind. She sat there for a long moment, watching families arrive for the day's activities, their laughter a stark contrast to her inner turmoil. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of her car. Her designer shoes, usually a source of confidence, felt out of place on the cracked concrete. The building's worn exterior, which she had once viewed with detachment, now felt like a sanctuary. As she approached the entrance, the door swung open. Grace burst out, her face lighting up at the sight of Olivia. "Aunt Liv, you came back!" The child's enthusiasm made Olivia's heart catch in her throat. No one had ever been so genuinely happy to see her. "I hope it's okay that I'm here," Olivia said softly, smoothing her skirt with nervous hands. "Dad says you're always welcome," Grace declared, grabbing Olivia's hand and pulling her inside. The warmth of the child's small fingers wrapped around hers felt like an anchor in a storm. Inside, Daniel was arranging chairs for the morning's activities. He looked up, his expression softening with concern when he saw Olivia's face. "Grace, honey, could you help Mrs. Thompson with the craft supplies?" Grace squeezed Olivia's hand before skipping away, leaving them alone. Daniel stepped closer, his voice gentle. "Rough night?" The simple question broke something in Olivia. Her carefully maintained composure cracked, and tears welled in her eyes. "My brother," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's going to block the transplant, he says." She couldn't finish the sentence. Daniel's face darkened with concern. "Here, sit down," he said, pulling up 2 chairs. The metal scraped against the floor as they sat, the sound echoing in the quiet room. "Tell me everything." Olivia found herself pouring out the whole story about Richard's visit, his cold determination to deny her the transplant, his cruel words about her not deserving a second chance. As she spoke, her hands twisted in her lap, her knuckles white with tension. "He's wrong," Daniel said firmly when she finished. His voice carried the quiet authority of someone who knew truth from lies. "Everyone deserves a chance at life, Olivia. Everyone deserves love." "But what if he's right?" Olivia whispered. "What if I don't deserve?" "Stop right there," Daniel interrupted, his eyes kind but determined. "That's fear talking. And fear lies." From across the room, Grace's voice rang out. "Can we pray for Aunt Liv?" Olivia turned to see Grace standing there, her craft supplies forgotten. The child's face showed such earnest concern that it made Olivia's heart ache. "Come here, sweetheart," Daniel called, and Grace hurried over. Without hesitation, she took both Olivia's hands in hers. Other people in the center began gathering around them, forming a circle of support Olivia had never experienced before. Grace closed her eyes, her young face serious. "Dear God," she began, her voice clear and strong. "Please help Aunt Liv. Her brother is being mean, but you're bigger than mean brothers. Please give her a new heart so she can stay with us and help at the center and come to more picnics. And please help her brother remember how to be nice. Amen." Olivia opened her eyes to find tears streaming down her face. Around her, the circle of people, some she knew, others strangers, all echoed, "Amen." Their faces showed genuine concern, real care for her well-being. "You're not alone in this fight," Daniel said quietly. "You have us now." Mrs. Thompson, an elderly volunteer, stepped forward and squeezed Olivia's shoulder. "We're all here for you, dear." Looking around at these people who asked nothing of her but offered everything, Olivia felt something shift inside her. The despair that had threatened to overwhelm her began to recede, replaced by something warmer, stronger. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I did to deserve such kindness." "You don't have to deserve kindness," Grace said matter-of-factly, still holding Olivia's hands. "That's why it's kind." Daniel smiled at his daughter's wisdom. "Grace is right, and she's also right about fighting. Your brother doesn't get to decide your worth, Olivia. Only you can do that." Olivia straightened in her chair, drawing strength from the warmth surrounding her. "Then I choose to fight," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I choose to live these days, however many I have, really living." Grace beamed. "Can you help me with the craft table? I'm making butterflies, and Dad's terrible at cutting straight lines." "Hey now," Daniel protested with a laugh. Olivia found herself laughing too, the sound surprising her with its genuineness. "I would love to help with butterflies," she said, standing up. Looking at Daniel, she added softly, "Thank you for everything." He shook his head. "No thanks needed. Just keep showing up, Olivia. That's all any of us can do. Keep showing up, keep trying, keep hoping." As she followed Grace to the craft table, Olivia felt lighter than she had in years. Richard's words still hurt, but they no longer had the power to crush her. Here, among these people who asked nothing of her wealth but offered everything of their hearts, she had found something money could never buy: genuine care, simple kindness, and the strength to hope. The morning light finally broke through the clouds outside, streaming through the windows and catching the glitter on Grace's butterflies. Olivia picked up a pair of scissors, ready to help create something beautiful. In this moment, she wasn't a dying woman or a wealthy heiress. She was simply someone learning to live again, one butterfly at a time. Monday morning arrived with golden sunshine streaming through the community center's windows. Olivia sat at a wooden table beside Grace, who was frowning at her math homework. The little girl's pencil tapped against the paper in frustration. "I just don't get fractions," Grace sighed, slumping in her chair. Olivia leaned closer, her silk blouse brushing against the worn tabletop. "Let me show you a trick my teacher taught me years ago." She took an apple from Grace's lunchbox and cut it into pieces. "See? When we divide things into equal parts, that's what fractions are all about." Grace's eyes lit up as understanding dawned. "Oh, so 3/4 is like having 3 pieces of the apple when it's cut into 4 parts?" "Exactly," Olivia smiled, warmth spreading through her chest as she watched Grace tackle the next problem with renewed confidence. Tuesday afternoon found them in Daniel's modest kitchen. The counter was dusted with flour, and the air smelled of vanilla and cinnamon. Daniel stood at the stove, stirring a pot of homemade sauce, while Olivia showed Grace how to roll cookie dough into perfect circles. "My mother never let me in the kitchen," Olivia admitted, flour streaking her dark hair. "She said it wasn't proper for a sterling to cook." Daniel wiped his hands on his apron, his eyes kind. "Well, in this kitchen, everyone cooks, even if we make a mess sometimes." As if on cue, Grace accidentally knocked over the flour container, creating a white cloud that made them all burst out laughing. Wednesday brought them to the town's weekly farmers market. Olivia pushed a cart while Grace skipped ahead, pointing out colorful vegetables and fresh flowers. The vendors, who once viewed Olivia with cautious distance, now greeted her warmly. "Try this honey, Miss Sterling," Mrs. Thompson called from her booth. "Just harvested yesterday." Olivia sampled the golden sweetness, amazed at how something so simple could taste so perfect. Daniel appeared beside her with fresh tomatoes and herbs for dinner. "You're glowing," he said softly. "It suits you." Thursday evening, they attended the town's amateur theater production. Grace insisted on sitting between them, her small hands holding both of theirs during the funny parts. When the lead actor forgot his lines, the whole audience, including Olivia, helped prompt him with encouraging whispers. "That's what community means," Daniel explained later. "We lift each other up." Friday afternoon was spent at the park. Olivia watched in amusement as Grace tried to teach her the rules of hopscotch. Her expensive heels lay forgotten in the grass. As she hopped from square to square, Grace's delighted giggles making her feel decades younger. "You're getting better, Aunt Liv," Grace cheered, the nickname making Olivia's heart skip a beat. Daniel joined them after finishing work, his carpenter's tools still in his truck. He brought sandwiches and lemonade, and they had an impromptu picnic under an old oak tree. Saturday morning found them at the community center's volunteer day. Olivia helped sort donated clothes. Her manicured nails not stopping her from diving into the work, she found herself sharing stories with other volunteers, learning about their lives, their struggles, and their hopes. "You've got a good eye for organizing," Mrs. Martinez commented as they arranged the clothing racks. "We could use your help more often." That evening, Daniel taught both Olivia and Grace how to make birdhouses in his workshop. The smell of fresh sawdust and the rhythmic sound of sandpaper filled the air as they worked together. "Sometimes," Daniel said, guiding Grace's hands on the wood, "the most beautiful things come from the simplest materials." Sunday brought them to the local church. Olivia sat in the worn wooden pew, Grace's head resting against her arm during the sermon. The sunlight through the stained glass windows painted rainbow patterns on their faces as the congregation sang hymns that seemed to touch something long dormant in Olivia's soul. That night, back in her mansion that suddenly felt too big and too empty, Olivia sat at her antique desk. The leather-bound journal before her was expensive, but she'd never used it until now. Her pen moved across the page as she reflected on the past 7 days. "I've lived more this week than in the last 30 years, she wrote, each word carrying the weight of truth. "In trying to prepare for death, I've somehow learned how to live." Her hand paused over the paper, tears blurring her vision as she thought of Grace's unconditional acceptance, Daniel's quiet strength, and the community that had opened their arms to her. She looked around her opulent bedroom, realizing that true richness had nothing to do with the crystal chandelier above her or the Persian rugs beneath her feet. It had everything to do with the flour still under her fingernails from baking, the small splinter in her thumb from building birdhouses, and the sound of Grace's laughter echoing in her memory. It was in Daniel's gentle encouragement and the way the townspeople now called her by her first name instead of Miss Sterling. She closed the journal, holding it close to her chest. For the first time since receiving her diagnosis, her heart felt truly full. Daniel Carter stood in his kitchen at dawn, carefully writing names and tasks on small pieces of paper. Grace sat at the table, still in her pajamas, munching on cereal and watching her father with bright eyes. "Do you think Miss Olivia has ever had a real birthday party, Dad?" Grace asked, milk dribbling down her chin. Daniel handed her a napkin with a gentle smile. "I don't think so, sweetheart. That's why we're going to make this one special." He glanced at his list. Mrs. Peterson from the bakery had agreed to make the cake. Mr. Thompson would handle the decorations at the community center, and Grace's school choir teacher, Miss Roberts, had enthusiastically offered to have the children perform. "Remember, not a word to Miss Olivia," Daniel reminded Grace, who nodded solemnly while making an exaggerated zipping motion across her lips. Throughout the morning, Daniel made discreet phone calls between his carpentry jobs. The whole town seemed eager to help. Perhaps they'd all seen the lonely figure Olivia cut as she walked the streets in her expensive clothes, or maybe they'd been touched by the way she'd slowly opened up at recent community events. At the grocery store, Mrs. Martinez promised to bring her famous tamales. "That woman needs more meat on her bones," she declared, patting Daniel's arm, "and more love in her heart. We'll give her both." By afternoon, Daniel was at the community center, directing volunteers who hung streamers and arranged chairs. The space transformed from its usual humble appearance into something magical. Paper lanterns cast warm glows across the ceiling, and hand-painted banners proclaimed, "Happy Birthday, Olivia," in cheerful colors. Grace arrived with her choirmates after school, their small voices filling the room with practice runs of "Happy Birthday." Daniel's heart swelled as he watched his daughter take her role seriously, standing straight and tall in the front row. "Daddy," Grace whispered during a break, tugging at his sleeve, "can I give Miss Olivia my special drawing first, before everyone else gives their presents?" "Of course you can, sweetheart." He knelt down to her level. "That's what makes it even more special. It comes from your heart." As evening approached, Daniel picked up the phone one last time. "Mrs. Sterling, everything's ready. Can you make sure she comes to the community center at 7? Olivia's housekeeper, the only person in her household who showed her real kindness, agreed readily. "I'll tell her there's an emergency meeting about the center's funding. She won't suspect a thing." At 6:55 p.m., Daniel gathered everyone into position, The choir kids fidgeted excitedly behind the partition, townspeople held their wrapped gifts, and Mrs. Peterson stood proudly beside her masterpiece, a three-tiered cake decorated with delicate sugar flowers. "Shh!" Grace Stage whispered at 2 p.m. when footsteps approached the door. "She's coming." The door creaked open, and Olivia's voice carried through the darkness. "Hello? Is anyone here? I got a message about a meeting." Daniel flipped the switch. "Surprise!" The room erupted with voices and light. Olivia stumbled backward, one hand flying to her throat. Her eyes, wide with shock, took in the decorations, the faces, the banner, and then filled with tears. Grace broke ranks first, running forward with her drawing held high. "Happy birthday, Miss Olivia. I drew you a picture of us at the park." The simple crayon drawing showed 3 stick figures, one tall man, one little girl, and one elegant woman with a big smile. Olivia's hands trembled as she accepted it. I don't understand," she whispered, looking around at all the beaming faces. Daniel stepped forward. "We wanted to show you that you're not alone anymore, that you matter to us." The choir began to sing, their young voices pure and sweet in the evening air. As Happy Birthday filled the room, more tears slipped down Olivia's cheeks. Mrs. Martinez wrapped her in a warm embrace. Mr. Thompson's wife pressed a homemade card into her hands. The baker proudly showed off her cake. Olivia's perfectly composed facade crumbled completely when she saw the table full of presents. Not expensive gifts, but heartfelt ones. Hand-knitted scarves, homemade preserves, photo albums of recent community events with her in them. "I haven't celebrated my birthday since I was 12, she confessed, her voice breaking. "My parents always said it was frivolous." "Well, that wasn't right," Grace declared with a child's simple wisdom, taking Olivia's hand. "Everyone deserves to be celebrated." The townspeople gathered closer, their voices joining the children's choir for another round of Happy Birthday. Olivia stood in their midst, tears flowing freely now, but her smile was radiant. For the first time in decades, she wasn't Olivia Sterling, the wealthy heiress. She was just Olivia, a woman surrounded by people who had chosen to love her. Daniel watched as his daughter led Olivia to the cake, as neighbors hugged her and shared stories, as genuine laughter replaced her usual careful chuckle. In this moment, time seemed to stand still. The illness, the threats, her brother's cruelty, none of it existed. There was only joy, community, and the pure, simple power of being loved. Looking at Olivia's glowing face in the warm light of the lanterns, Daniel knew that this birthday celebration wasn't just a party. It was a revelation. Sometimes the richest gifts came wrapped not in expensive paper, but in the simple kindness of ordinary people who opened their hearts to someone in need. The singing swelled one final time, and Olivia closed her eyes, swaying slightly to the melody, tears still streaming down her face. But these weren't tears of sorrow or loneliness. They were tears of profound gratitude, of belonging, of finally finding her place in the world. The street lamps cast warm pools of light along Main Street as Daniel and Olivia walked slowly toward her house. The autumn evening had turned crisp, and Daniel had insisted on lending Olivia his worn leather jacket. It hung loose on her shoulders, carrying the faint scent of sawdust and coffee. "I still can't believe what you all did today," Olivia said, her voice soft with lingering emotion. She clutched a handmade birthday card from Grace close to her heart. "No one's ever thrown me a party like that before." Daniel glanced at her, noting how the streetlight caught the silver in her hair. "Never? Not even as a kid?" Olivia shook her head. The Sterling way was different. Birthdays meant formal dinners with father's business associates. Mother would arrange everything through the staff, guest lists, catering, decorations. I'd get expensive presents, but... She trailed off, looking down at Grace's card with its crooked hearts and glitter. Nothing like this. They passed the town square where, just hours ago, the community had gathered to celebrate. Paper streamers still fluttered from the gazebo. "It wasn't always just the 3 of us, you know," Daniel said quietly. "Sarah, my wife, she loved throwing parties. Didn't matter if we could barely afford it. She'd somehow make magic happen with dollar store decorations and box-mix cupcakes." Olivia touched his arm gently. "Tell me about her?" Daniel took a deep breath. "She was a light. That's the best way I can describe her. Could walk into a room and make everyone feel special. When she got sick, she still insisted on hosting Grace's 6th birthday party from her hospital bed. Had all the kids crowd in, wearing those little paper hats." His voice grew thick with memory. They walked in understanding silence for a moment. Olivia spoke first. "My mother died when I was 12. I barely knew her, really. She was always at charity functions, social clubs. The maids raised me more than she did. When she passed, Father became even more distant, threw himself into work. Richard, my brother, he was sent to boarding school. The house felt like a museum after that. Is that why you live there alone now? Daniel asked carefully. Partly. Olivia's hands twisted together. Father left it to me in his will, which infuriated Richard. He thought, as the son, it should be his. But I couldn't leave. It was the only home I knew, empty as it was. I kept thinking if I just decorated differently, filled it with art and music, it would feel warmer. She gave a small, sad laugh. 30 years later, and I'm still trying. They turned onto Maple Avenue, where Olivia's Victorian mansion loomed ahead. Daniel noticed how her steps slowed, reluctant to end their walk. You know, he said, Grace asks about you every morning now. Is Aunt Liv coming to the center today? Can we save her a cookie from lunch? He smiled at Olivia's surprised look. You've become part of her world. Tears welled in Olivia's eyes. I never thought. I mean, all those years of charitable donations, sitting on foundation boards, I thought that was how you connected with people. Write checks, attend galas, smile for photos. But this past week, just sitting with Grace, helping her with math homework or hearing about her day, she wiped her eyes. It feels real in a way nothing else has. They reached her front gate. Daniel turned to face her, his expression earnest in the moonlight. That's because it is real, Olivia. No pretense, no expectations, just life. Messy and simple and true. Olivia clutched his jacket closer. I was so lonely before, she whispered. I didn't even realize how much until now. You're not alone anymore, Daniel said firmly. Whatever happens, you have us. You have this whole town. She nodded, unable to speak. Daniel squeezed her hand gently before saying goodnight. Olivia watched him walk away, his figure growing smaller under the street lamps. Inside her massive house, Olivia moved through familiar rooms that somehow felt different now. She changed into her nightgown and sat at her vanity, looking at her reflection. The woman who stared back seemed softer somehow, less rigid. Her eyes held a warmth that hadn't been there before. She carefully placed Grace's birthday card on her bedside table, propping it up so she could see the child's careful writing. Happy birthday, Aunt Liv. I love you. Simple words that held more meaning than any expensive gift she'd ever received. Lying in her big 4-poster bed, Olivia felt something shift inside her chest. Not the physical pain she'd grown used to, but a different sensation, like a knot slowly loosening. For the first time in decades, the silence of the house didn't feel oppressive. Instead, it held echoes of today's laughter, the warmth of shared stories, the promise of tomorrow's connections. As sleep began to claim her, Olivia's last thoughts were of Grace's gap-toothed smile, of Daniel's gentle understanding, of neighbors who had hugged her without hesitation. The walls she'd built around her heart were crumbling, replaced by something far more precious, a sense of finally, truly belonging. The morning sun streamed through the community center's windows, casting long shadows across the worn hardwood floors. Olivia stood near the craft table, watching Grace carefully arrange colorful paper flowers they had made together. Her heart swelled with affection as the little girl's tongue poked out in concentration. Look, Aunt Liv. Grace held up a bright yellow creation. This one's for... The world suddenly tilted. A crushing pressure seized Olivia's chest, stealing her breath. The paper flower slipped from Grace's hand as Olivia stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. Her vision blurred, dark spots dancing at the edges. Daniel! Grace's frightened cry pierced the air. Daddy, help! Daniel burst through the doorway from his office, his face draining of color when he saw Olivia gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles white. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, catching her just as her knees buckled. Olivia, stay with me. His voice was steady but urgent. He lowered her gently to the floor, cradling her head. Mrs. Henderson, he called out to the elderly volunteer in the next room. Call 911. Olivia tried to focus on Daniel's face, but everything seemed distant, as if she were underwater. The pain in her chest intensified, radiating down her left arm. She could hear Grace crying somewhere nearby. Take care of Grace, Olivia managed to whisper, her fingers weakly clutching Daniel's shirt. Don't let her see. Sarah, Daniel called to another volunteer. Please take Grace to the reading room. His attention returned to Olivia, his palm warm against her clammy cheek. Just breathe, nice and slow. Help is coming. The next few minutes blurred together in a haze of voices and movement. Paramedics arrived, their efficient hands checking vitals, attaching monitors. Olivia caught fragments of their rapid-fire medical speak. BP dropping. Arrhythmia. Possible cardiac event. I'm riding with her. Daniel's voice cut through the fog. He hadn't let go of her hand. The ambulance ride was a symphony of sirens and beeping monitors. Daniel's presence anchored her, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand as he murmured quiet prayers. Through the waves of pain and fear, Olivia focused on his voice, using it as a lifeline. At the hospital, everything accelerated. Doctors in white coats swooped in, rattling off questions about her medical history. Nurses efficiently transferred her to a bed, hooking up more monitors, and starting an IV. Daniel stood at the edge of the room, his worried eyes never leaving her face as he answered what questions he could. Miss Sterling. A grave-faced doctor finally approached her bed, chart in hand. I'm Dr. Matthews. We've reviewed your records and run preliminary tests. I'm afraid your condition has deteriorated significantly faster than expected. Olivia tried to sit up straighter, but the movement sent fresh pain through her chest. Daniel stepped closer, his hand finding her shoulder in silent support. Your brother Richard Sterling contacted us this morning. Dr. Matthews continued, his expression tightening. He's exercised his medical power of attorney to formally block your placement on the transplant list. The words hit like physical blows. Olivia closed her eyes, hot tears sliding down her temples. She'd known Richard would follow through on his threat, but the reality was devastating. That can't be legal, Daniel protested, his voice rough with emotion. She's of sound mind. She should have the right to make her own medical decisions. Dr. Matthews shook his head. Unfortunately, the paperwork is binding. It was signed years ago, giving Mr. Sterling full authority over major medical decisions if Miss Sterling became seriously ill. Without his approval, we cannot proceed with listing her for transplant. Olivia felt the walls closing in. All the joy and hope she discovered over the past weeks seemed to evaporate, leaving only the cold reality of her situation. The monitors betrayed her spike in anxiety, beeping more rapidly. There has to be something we can do, Daniel insisted, his hand tightening protectively on her shoulder. Some way to challenge this. You can pursue legal options, Dr. Matthews said carefully, but given the time frame. He left the sentence unfinished, his meaning clear. Legal battles took time Olivia no longer had. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. A nurse entered, carrying Olivia's personal effects in a clear plastic bag. Miss Sterling, your brother left this for you. She handed over an envelope. With trembling fingers, Olivia opened it. Inside was a single sheet of expensive stationery, bearing only a few typed lines. Consider this my final act of protecting the family name. You've never understood the responsibility that comes with being a Sterling. I won't allow you to waste a second chance on your newfound simple life, while more deserving recipients wait. Your reckless choices have consequences. The paper crumpled in Olivia's fist. A lifetime of Richard's cold judgment and control crashed over her. The monitors began beeping more urgently as her heart rate climbed. I need you to try to stay calm, Dr. Matthews said, moving to adjust her medication. We'll do everything we can to keep you stable, but without the transplant option. How long? Olivia's voice was barely a whisper. The doctor's face softened with compassion. Given the acceleration of your condition, days at most. I'm so sorry. Daniel made a choked sound, his fingers digging into the rail of her hospital bed. Olivia reached for his hand, needing his strength as much as he seemed to need her touch. We'll be monitoring you closely, Dr. Matthews continued. For now, try to rest. A nurse will be in shortly to get you settled in your room. As the doctor left, silence fell heavy in the small emergency bay. The steady beep of monitors and the distant sounds of the hospital seemed to emphasize the weight of what they'd just learned. Olivia stared at the ceiling, tears sliding silently down her face. This isn't over, Daniel finally said, his voice thick but determined. We'll fight this. I'll call every lawyer in town if I have to. Olivia turned her head to look at him, taking in the fierce protectiveness in his expression. In just a few short weeks, this man and his daughter had given her more love and belonging than she'd known in decades. The thought of leaving them made her heartache worse than any physical pain. Grace, she whispered, she'll be so scared. Sarah will keep her at the center until we know more. Daniel pulled a chair closer to her bed, still holding her hand. But she's stronger than you think. We both are. And we're not giving up on you. A nurse appeared with admission papers and began efficiently preparing Olivia for transfer to a private room. Through it all, Daniel stayed by her side, a steady presence in the storm of uncertainty. But they both knew the truth that hung unspoken in the air. Time, the one thing they needed most, was slipping away far too quickly. The hospital corridor felt endless as Daniel walked toward the exit, his shoulders heavy with worry for Olivia. His footsteps echoed against the sterile tiles, matching the nervous rhythm of his heart. He hadn't slept since Olivia's collapse, and exhaustion pulled at every muscle. A sharp voice cut through his thoughts. "Mr. Carter." Daniel turned to find a tall man in an expensive charcoal suit blocking his path. Richard Sterling's cold eyes sized him up like a predator studying prey. Two men in dark suits flanked him, their presence making the hallway feel smaller. "Mr. Sterling." Daniel kept his voice steady, though his pulse quickened. "I was just heading back to check on your sister." Richard's lip curled. "No, you weren't." He stepped closer, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. "You're going to walk out of this hospital and never contact my sister again." "That's not going to happen." Daniel planted his feet firmly, squaring his shoulders despite the difference in their heights. "Olivia needs support right now, not isolation." "Support?" Richard laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "What she needs is for opportunists like you to stop taking advantage of her vulnerability." "Did you think I wouldn't look into you, Mr. Carter? A struggling single father, barely making ends meet at that pitiful community center?" Daniel felt his face flush, but he held Richard's gaze. "Money isn't everything, Mr. Sterling. Your sister understands that now." "My sister is dying." Richard's voice turned to ice. "And you're using her condition to manipulate her emotions. What's your angle? Looking for an inheritance?" "That's not—" "Let me be clear." Richard moved even closer, lowering his voice. "I've spent the morning speaking with Child Protective Services. It would be a shame if someone raised concerns about Grace's living conditions. A single father, working multiple jobs, leaving his daughter unsupervised." Daniel's heart stopped. "You wouldn't dare. Try me." Richard's smile was sharp as a blade. "I have friends in family court. One phone call, and you'll spend the next year fighting to keep custody of your daughter. Can you afford those legal bills, Mr. Carter?" Images of Grace flashed through Daniel's mind. Her drawings on the fridge, her laughter at breakfast, her small hand in his as they walked to school. The thought of losing her made his knees weak. "And that community center you're so proud of?" Richard continued. "I own the bank that holds its mortgage, one signature, and it's foreclosed. How many families would that affect? All because you couldn't mind your own business." Daniel's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You'd hurt innocent people just to control your sister?" "I'm protecting the Sterling family name." Richard straightened his tie. "Olivia's condition has made her unstable. She needs professional care, not some small-town handyman playing hero. She needs love," Daniel said, his voice rough with emotion. "Something you've denied her entire life." Richard's face darkened. "You know nothing about our family." "I know enough." Daniel took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I know Olivia lights up when Grace hugs her. I know she laughs now, real laughter, not the polite kind she used to hide behind. I know she's terrified of dying alone, which is exactly what you're trying to force her to do." "Final warning, Mr. Carter." Richard nodded to one of his men, who produced a thick manila envelope. "Inside you'll find documentation of every potential violation we could report about your parenting. Every time you worked late, every school event you missed, every repair your house needs. One word from me, and it all goes to the authorities." Daniel's throat tightened as he took the envelope, its weight like lead in his hands. The papers inside could destroy everything he'd built for Grace, everything he'd promised his late wife he'd protect. "Think about your daughter," Richard said softly, almost kindly. "Is my sister worth losing her over?" The question hung in the air between them. Daniel closed his eyes, seeing Grace's face, hearing her prayers for Aunt Liv every night before bed. He thought of Olivia's transformation over the past weeks, how she'd gone from a lonely woman in a mansion to someone who belonged, who mattered, who loved and was loved in return. Opening his eyes, Daniel handed the envelope back to Richard. "Keep it." "Excuse me?" "Keep your threats." Daniel's voice grew stronger with each word. "You can take everything I own. You can make my life hell. But you can't make me abandon someone who needs help. That's not the example I want to set for my daughter." Richard's face flushed with anger. "You're making a terrible mistake." "No," Daniel said quietly. "You are. And someday, you'll have to answer for how you treated your sister when she needed you most." He stepped around Richard and his men, heading back toward Olivia's room. His hands were shaking, and his future had never felt more uncertain, but his steps were steady. Behind him, he heard Richard call out one last time, "You'll regret this, Carter." Daniel didn't turn around. He walked until he reached an empty waiting room, then sank into a chair, his legs finally giving out. The full weight of what he'd just done crashed over him. He could lose everything, his home, his work, even Grace. The thought made him physically ill, but as he sat there, head in his hands, he remembered something his wife had told him before she died. Love isn't about doing what's easy, it's about doing what's right, even when it costs you everything. Daniel straightened in his chair, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Richard Sterling could threaten him all he wanted. He could take away his possessions, his security, even his reputation, but he couldn't take away Daniel's choice to stand by someone in need. Looking toward Olivia's room, Daniel made a silent promise, not just to her, but to himself. He wouldn't run, he wouldn't hide. No matter what Richard threw at him, he would face it. Because sometimes, loving others meant being willing to lose everything else. His phone buzzed with a text from Grace. "Is Aunt Liv okay? Can we visit her after school?" Daniel smiled through his tears as he typed back, "Yes, sweetheart. We'll go see her together. Come what may." He would not abandon Olivia. Some things were worth fighting for, even if you had to fight alone. The hospital room was silent except for the steady beeping of monitors. Olivia Sterling lay in the narrow bed, her normally elegant appearance replaced by hospital-issued pajamas and tangled hair. The white walls seemed to close in around her, making her feel smaller than ever. She stared at the ceiling, too tired to even cry anymore. The events of the day played over and over in her mind. Her collapse, the doctor's grim face, and worst of all, the confirmation that Richard had succeeded in blocking her from the transplant list. Her brother had won, just as he always did. The sound of squeaking shoes in the hallway barely registered. Olivia closed her eyes, expecting another nurse coming to check her vitals. Instead, she heard the softest of whispers. "Aunt Liv?" Olivia's eyes flew open. There, peeking around the doorframe, was Grace Carter's small face, her eyes wide with concern. The little girl glanced nervously down the hallway before tiptoeing into the room. "Grace?" Olivia's voice cracked. "Sweetheart, what are you doing here? It's way past visiting hours." Grace approached the bed, her sneakers making tiny squeaking sounds on the floor. "Dad's talking to some doctors. He thinks I'm sitting in the waiting room, but..." She bit her lip. "I had to see you." Olivia's heart squeezed, not from her condition, but from the pure love radiating from this child who had somehow worked her way into her life. "You shouldn't get in trouble for me, dear." "I don't care about trouble." Grace's chin lifted stubbornly, reminding Olivia so much of Daniel. "You're family now." Those three words hit Olivia like a physical blow. Family. Something she'd never truly had, not even when surrounded by blood relatives in that cold mansion. Grace climbed carefully onto the edge of the hospital bed, mindful of the IV lines. Her small hand found Olivia's, warm fingers wrapping around cold ones. "Does it hurt?" she whispered. Olivia tried to smile. "No, sweetie, I'm just very tired. Dad says your brother is being mean." Grace's face scrunched up in confusion. "Why doesn't he want you to get better?" The question was so simple, so direct, the way only children could ask things. Olivia felt tears welling up. Sometimes people hold on to anger for so long they forget how to let it go." Grace nodded sagely, as if this made perfect sense. Then, without warning, she closed her eyes and bowed her head, still clutching Olivia's hand. "Dear God," she began in a clear whisper, "it's me, Grace Carter. I know you're really busy taking care of everyone, but Aunt Liv needs help right now." She squeezed Olivia's hand tighter. "Please give her a new heart, a strong one that works good, and maybe help her brother remember how to love people again. Thank you for listening. Amen." Olivia stared at the little girl, overwhelmed by the pure faith in that simple prayer. Grace opened her eyes and smiled at her, gap-toothed and confident. "You don't need to cry, Aunt Liv," she said, reaching up to wipe a tear from Olivia's cheek. "God's really good at fixing hearts. He fixed Dad's after Mom died." Olivia caught Grace's hand and pressed it to her cheek, savoring its warmth. "Tell me about that," she whispered, needing to hear more. Grace settled more comfortably on the bed. "Well, Dad was really sad for a long time. He didn't smile much, even though he tried to for me. But then we started going to church more and helping at the community center." Her face brightened. "And now he smiles all the time, especially when you're around." Something warm bloomed in Olivia's chest at those words. She thought of Daniel's steady presence, his unwavering support even in the face of Richard's threats. "The heart you have now might be sick," Grace continued, "but love makes everything better. That's what Dad always says." She paused, thinking, "And you have lots of love now." Me and Dad and Miss Jenny from the center and Mr. Thompson who brings those yummy cookies. As Grace rattled off names, Olivia realized with startling clarity just how many people had entered her life in these past weeks. People who smiled when they saw her, who asked how she was doing and actually cared about the answer. "And we're not giving up," Grace declared firmly. "Dad says we're going to fight for you no matter what your mean brother says." Olivia couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Instead, she tugged Grace closer, and the little girl carefully snuggled against her side, mindful of the tubes and wires. "Want to hear a secret?" Grace whispered after a moment. "Every night before bed, I make the same wish. I wish that you'll get better and stay with us forever, because you make Dad happy and you help me with my math homework way better than he does." A wet laugh escaped Olivia. "Oh, sweetheart." "Grace Carter," Daniel's worried voice came from the doorway. "I've been looking everywhere for you." Grace sat up, not looking the least bit guilty. "I was helping Aunt Liv feel better." Daniel's expression softened as he took in the scene. His daughter curled up next to Olivia, their hands still clasped together. "I see that." He came into the room, his face tired but warm. "But it's late, honey. We should let Olivia rest." "Just 5 more minutes?" Grace pleaded, looking between them with hopeful eyes. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. I'll wait outside." After he left, Grace turned back to Olivia. "Can I say one more prayer before I go?" Olivia nodded, unable to speak. Grace closed her eyes again, her face serious with concentration. "Dear God, it's me again. Please watch over Aunt Liv tonight. Send her good dreams and make sure she knows she's not alone anymore. And thank you for bringing her to us. Amen." The simple prayer, spoken with such certainty, broke something open in Olivia's heart. As Grace hugged her goodbye and Daniel led her away with a gentle smile, Olivia felt tears sliding down her cheeks. But they weren't tears of despair anymore. In the quiet of her hospital room, she closed her eyes, Grace's words echoing in her mind. "You're not alone anymore." For the first time since her collapse, since Richard's cruel verdict, Olivia felt a tiny spark of hope flicker back to life in her chest. That spark grew stronger as she drifted off to sleep, her hands still warm from Grace's touch, her heart full of a child's unwavering faith and love. The morning sun cast long shadows across the town square as Daniel Carter worked tirelessly, setting up a makeshift podium with his weathered carpenter's hands. His movements were quick but careful, driven by both urgency and purpose. The square, usually quiet at this hour, buzzed with activity as townspeople streamed in from every direction. "Need any help there, Daniel?" called out Pastor Mike, his collar visible under a warm jacket. The older man carried a stack of handmade signs under his arm. "Thanks, Pastor. Could you help set up these chairs?" Daniel gestured to the folded chairs leaning against the podium. His voice was tired but determined. He hadn't slept much since Olivia's collapse, spending his nights planning this gathering while Grace stayed with a neighbor. People began filling the square. Shopkeepers who remembered Olivia's quiet visits, teachers from Grace's school, families Daniel had never met but who had stories about the anonymous donations that had helped them through hard times. Mrs. Rodriguez from the community center kitchen dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "She paid for my Manuel's surgery," Mrs. Rodriguez told anyone who would listen. "Never wanted recognition. Just sent the check through her lawyer with a note saying, 'Be well.'" Daniel watched as more stories emerged. The owner of the local bookstore revealed how Olivia had secretly funded their children's reading program. A young mother spoke of scholarship money that appeared just when she'd lost hope of attending nursing school. The crowd grew larger than Daniel had dared hope. Some carried signs reading, "Save Olivia Sterling," and "Love Conquers All." Others held candles, though the morning sun made them invisible. The gathering wasn't just a protest. It felt more like a family coming together for one of their own. Grace appeared at Daniel's side, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. "Is this going to help Aunt Liv?" she asked, her voice small but hopeful. Daniel knelt beside his daughter, straightening her jacket. "We're showing her brother that Olivia matters to all of us, that she's not alone anymore." Local news vans began arriving, their reporters setting up cameras. Daniel hadn't called them. Word had spread on its own. He stepped up to the podium, his heart pounding. Public speaking had never been his strong suit, but love made people brave in ways they never expected. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice carrying across the now hushed square. "Most of you know Olivia Sterling as the quiet woman from the big house on the hill, but today, I want to tell you about the Olivia I've come to know." Daniel shared the story of their first meeting, of Grace's drawing, of potluck dinners and park picnics. His voice grew stronger as he spoke of Olivia's transformation from a lonely woman into someone who laughed freely and loved deeply. "And now," he continued. Her own brother is denying her the chance to live, not because of medical reasons, but because of old grudges and cold hearts. One by one, people stepped forward to share their stories. Mrs. Rodriguez spoke of Manuel's surgery. The bookstore owner described how Olivia would secretly visit just to watch children reading in the new beanbag chairs she'd provided. A teenager told how an anonymous donation had saved his family's farm. Pastor Mike stepped up next. "I've known Richard Sterling for 20 years, he said, his voice grave. "And I've watched him choose pride over love time and again. But today, we're here to show him that love is stronger than pride." Grace tugged at Daniel's sleeve, wanting to speak. He lifted her up to the microphone, his heart swelling with pride as she faced the crowd without fear. "Aunt Liv taught me how to make paper cranes," Grace said clearly. "She said they're wishes that fly up to heaven. I made one every night, wishing she could be my real aunt forever." She pulled a slightly crumpled paper crane from her pocket. "Please don't take her away, Mr. Sterling. Please give her a new heart." A movement at the edge of the crowd caught Daniel's attention. Richard Sterling stood there, partially hidden behind a tree, his usually stern face showing signs of uncertainty. He watched as more people came forward. The grocery store owner who spoke of Olivia's weekly donations to the food bank, a teacher who revealed how Olivia had anonymously funded the school's art program, an elderly man who wept while describing how she'd paid for his wife's hospice care. The crowd had swelled to fill the square. People who had never met Olivia were crying, moved by the stories of her quiet kindness. The news cameras captured it all, broadcasting live across the region. Richard Sterling stepped slightly forward, his expensive suit out of place among the town's casual gathering. His face showed the first cracks in his carefully maintained facade as he watched a group of children release paper cranes into the air. Grace had taught them how to make them. Daniel noticed Richard's presence but didn't call attention to him. Instead, he returned to the podium one last time. "Olivia Sterling has spent years hiding her light," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She thought she didn't deserve love because that's what she was taught. But look around. Look at all the lives she's touched. Look at all the love she's given, asking nothing in return." The crowd murmured in agreement, and more paper cranes took flight, carrying the hopes and prayers of an entire town. Richard Sterling watched them soar, his hands clenched at his sides, his expression increasingly troubled as the weight of the community's love for his sister pressed against his carefully constructed walls of bitterness. Daniel continued, "We're not asking for a miracle, we're asking for a chance for Olivia to live, to love, to be the person she's finally allowing herself to become." "Mr. Sterling," he said, looking directly at Richard now, "your sister has touched more lives than you know. She's created more good than you've ever imagined. And we're all here today because we refuse to let that light go out." As if on cue, Grace began singing "Amazing Grace," her clear child's voice carrying across the square. One by one, others joined in, until hundreds of voices rose together in a spontaneous chorus of hope and love. Richard Sterling took another step forward, his face showing the first signs of real emotion. For the first time in decades, he looked lost, uncertain, as if the fortress of his convictions was crumbling under the weight of so much love for the sister he'd tried so hard to deny. The town square buzzed with quiet energy as hundreds gathered around the makeshift stage. Hand-painted signs bobbed in the gentle breeze. "Save Olivia," "Love conquers all," and "Give her a chance." The autumn air carried a crisp chill, but the crowd's warmth was undeniable. Daniel stood at the podium, his voice steady and clear. "We're here today because someone special needs our help. Someone who's touched all our lives, even if we didn't know it at the time." Olivia sat in a wheelchair near the stage, wrapped in a thick blanket. Her face was pale, but her eyes sparkled with unshed tears as she watched person after person step up to share their stories. Mrs. Thompson from the library spoke about the anonymous donation that saved their children's reading program. Mr. Rodriguez testified about the mysterious benefactor who helped his family after the flood. Each story painted a picture of quiet kindness that had rippled through their community for years. In the back of the crowd, Richard Sterling stood rigid, his expensive suit out of place among the townspeople's casual clothing. His jaw clenched tighter with each speaker, but he didn't leave. Then Grace tugged on Daniel's sleeve. "Daddy, can I say something?" Daniel looked down at his daughter, surprised. She'd been unusually quiet all morning, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. "Are you sure, sweetie?" Grace nodded, her small face determined. Daniel lifted her onto the stage, and the crowd fell silent at the sight of the little girl in her pink sweater and messy ponytail. "Mr. Sterling," Grace called out, her voice trembling but clear, She stared straight at Richard, who visibly stiffened. "I know you're Aunt Liv's brother." A murmur rippled through the crowd as people turned to look at Richard. He shifted uncomfortably but didn't break eye contact with Grace. "My daddy says sometimes people do mean things because they're hurting inside." Grace hugged her rabbit closer. "I know what it's like to hurt. My mommy died when I was really little. I don't remember her much, but I remember being sad and scared." Olivia pressed a hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Daniel stood protectively behind Grace, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "But then I met Aunt Liv," Grace continued, her voice growing stronger. "She helps me with my math homework and makes funny faces when she thinks nobody's looking. She taught me how to make proper tea with cookies, even though she spilled the first time and we both laughed so hard." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. Even Richard's stern expression flickered. "She's not just rich and fancy like you think. She's warm and kind, and sometimes she's scared too." Grace's lower lip trembled. "She's my family now too, and family is supposed to help each other, not be mean." Richard took a step forward, his face unreadable. Grace didn't back down. "Please," she pleaded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Please, let Aunt Liv live. I pray every night for God to give her a new heart. But Daddy says you have to say yes first. Please don't take away my new aunt. I already lost my mommy. I don't want to lose Aunt Liv too." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard stood frozen, his carefully maintained mask cracking. For a moment, something raw and vulnerable flickered across his face. Pastor Mike stepped forward from the crowd. "Mr. Sterling, your sister has been a blessing to this community, not through grand gestures or public displays, but through quiet acts of kindness that have changed lives. Isn't that worth saving?" Richard's hands clenched into fists. His gaze darted between Grace's tear-stained face and Olivia's wheelchair. The crowd waited, holding their collective breath. Then, without a word, Richard Sterling turned on his heel and strode away, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. The sound echoed through the square until he disappeared around the corner, leaving everyone in tense silence. Grace's small shoulders slumped. Daniel quickly scooped her up, holding her close as she buried her face in his neck. "You are so brave, sweetheart," he whispered. The crowd stirred uneasily, exchanging worried glances. Olivia reached out a trembling hand, and Grace immediately wiggled free from Daniel's arms to run to her. The little girl carefully hugged Olivia, mindful of her weakness. "I meant every word, Aunt Liv," Grace whispered fiercely. "You're my family now." Olivia could only hold her close, too overcome with emotion to speak. The autumn wind rustled through the trees, scattering golden leaves across the square as the townspeople watched, united in their concern and hope for the woman who had quietly touched all their lives. The stage stood empty now, the podium abandoned. Richard's abrupt departure left a heavy weight of uncertainty hanging in the air. No one knew if Grace's heartfelt plea had reached through his armor of bitterness, or if his silence meant something darker. They could only wait, and hope, and pray. The hospital room's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Olivia's pale face. The steady beep of monitors provided a grim rhythm to the afternoon silence. Outside the window, gray clouds gathered, matching the heavy atmosphere within. Daniel sat in the worn vinyl chair beside the bed, his work-roughened hands clasped tightly together. His eyes never left Olivia's face, watching each labored breath with growing concern. The past 2 days had been a blur of doctors, nurses, and steadily worsening news. Grace curled up in the chair next to him, her small frame wrapped in the handmade quilt she'd brought from home. She'd refused to go to school, insisting on staying with Aunt Liv. Her drawing book lay forgotten in her lap, pages filled with bright pictures of the three of them together. "Daddy," Grace whispered, her voice trembling, "Aunt Liv looks so tired." Daniel reached over and squeezed her hand. "I know, sweetheart, but she's fighting hard." Olivia stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open. Even this small movement seemed to drain her energy. "Grace?" she murmured. "I'm here." Grace jumped up, the quilt falling to the floor. She grabbed Olivia's hand, careful of the IV lines. "I drew you another picture. See? It's us having a picnic when you get better." A weak smile touched Olivia's lips. "It's beautiful, dear heart." Daniel's chest tightened at the endearment. In just a few short weeks, Olivia had become such an essential part of their lives. The thought of losing her now felt unbearable. The monitors beat more rapidly, and Olivia's breath grew more labored. Daniel pressed the call button, his heart racing. A nurse hurried in, checking vitals and adjusting medications. "Her blood pressure's dropping," the nurse said quietly to Daniel. "I'll page the doctor." Grace's eyes widened with fear. "Daddy? It's okay, honey. The doctors are helping her. But Daniel's voice cracked slightly, betraying his own fear. Olivia's eyes closed again, her hand going limp in Grace's grip. The little girl started crying softly, pressing Olivia's fingers to her cheek. "Please don't go, Aunt Liv," she pleaded. "You promised to teach me how to make those special cookies, remember? And Daddy needs you. We both need you." Daniel wrapped an arm around Grace's shoulders, pulling her close. His own eyes burned with unshed tears as he watched Olivia's chest rise and fall with increasing difficulty. The doctor arrived, his face grave as he checked Olivia's charts. "Mr. Carter, perhaps it would be better if—" The phone on the wall rang sharply, cutting through the tension. The doctor answered it, his expression shifting from annoyance to surprise. "Yes, I understand. Right away." He hung up and turned to them, his eyes bright. "We've found a match. A donor heart just became available at Memorial Hospital in the city." Daniel stood so quickly his chair scraped across the floor. "What?" "The donor is a perfect tissue match for Miss Sterling. We need to move quickly." "But Richard," Daniel interrupted, "her brother won't approve it." The doctor held up his hand. "That's being handled. Right now, we need to prep Miss Sterling for immediate transfer. The transplant team is already assembling." Grace bounced on her toes, hope lighting up her tear-stained face. "Did you hear that, Aunt Liv? They found you a new heart." The room burst into activity. Nurses rushed in, preparing equipment for transport. Olivia's eyes opened again, confusion and hope warring in her tired gaze. "Daniel?" she whispered. He leaned close, taking her hand. "They found a heart, Olivia. You're going to get your second chance." A single tear rolled down her cheek. "But Richard," as if summoned by his name, a shadow appeared in the doorway. Richard Sterling stood there, his usual immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. His face showed signs of sleepless nights, and his hands trembled as he clutched a folder of papers. The room fell silent. Grace stepped forward, placing herself between Richard and Olivia's bed like a tiny guardian angel. Richard's eyes moved from his sister's pale face to Grace's determined stance, then to Daniel's protective posture. Something in his rigid expression cracked. His voice was rough. "I have the consent forms." Daniel felt hope surge through him, but he remained cautious. "You're agreeing to the transplant?" Richard stepped into the room, his shoes clicking on the linoleum floor. He looked at Olivia again, and this time there was something different in his gaze, something that looked almost like regret. "The little girl's speech at the rally," he said quietly. "She said Olivia was her family now." He swallowed hard. "I've spent decades telling myself our family's reputation was all that mattered. But watching that child," he gestured to Grace, "she showed me what family really means." Olivia made a soft sound, reaching weakly toward her brother. Richard moved closer, his usual coldness melting away. "I'm sorry, Liv," he whispered, using the childhood nickname for the first time in years. "I've been so wrong." He turned to the doctor, holding out the folder. "Where do I sign?" The fluorescent lights of the surgical wing cast long shadows in the empty hallway as nurses wheeled Olivia's gurney toward the operating room. Daniel and Grace walked alongside until they reached the double doors marked "Authorized Personnel Only." Olivia's face was pale, but her eyes held a glimmer of hope as she looked up at them. The surgical cap made her seem smaller somehow, more vulnerable. "Grace, sweetheart," Olivia whispered, reaching out a trembling hand. "Thank you for being my little angel." Grace clutched Olivia's fingers, tears streaming down her face. "You have to come back, Aunt Liv. You promised we'd make cookies together." "I'll do my very best." Olivia managed a weak smile, then turned to Daniel. "Daniel, Save your strength," he said softly, squeezing her other hand. "We'll be right here waiting for you." The head surgeon, Dr. Matthews, approached in his scrubs. "It's time, Miss Sterling. The donor heart is being prepared, and we need to get started." Daniel bent down and pressed a gentle kiss to Olivia's forehead. "We'll see you soon." Grace hugged Olivia carefully, mindful of the IV lines. "I love you, Aunt Liv." Olivia's eyes welled with tears. "I love you both so much," she whispered. They watched as the nurses wheeled her through the double doors, the sound of their squeaking wheels fading into silence. Grace buried her face in Daniel's side, her small shoulders shaking with sobs. "Come on, sweetheart," Daniel said, leading her to the waiting room. "Let's pray for Aunt Liv." The waiting room was mostly empty at this early hour. A few other families sat in scattered clusters, all wearing the same worried expressions. The walls were painted a soft blue that was probably meant to be calming, but it only made everything feel colder. Daniel settled into one of the vinyl chairs, pulling Grace onto his lap. She curled against his chest like she used to do when she was smaller, clutching her worn prayer journal. "Dear God," Grace began in a wavering voice. "Please watch over Aunt Liv while the doctors fix her heart. Please let the new heart work perfectly and help her get better fast." She paused, sniffling. "And please let her know we're waiting for her and that we love her very much. Amen." "Amen," Daniel echoed, his own voice thick with emotion. The minutes crawled by like hours. Grace eventually dozed off, exhausted from worry and tears. Daniel sat motionless, not wanting to disturb her, while his mind raced with prayers and memories of the past few weeks. He remembered Olivia's first awkward attempt at their community center potluck, how she'd brought an expensive catered dish, and then ended up preferring Grace's simple mac and cheese. The way she'd gradually learned to relax and laugh, her elegant reserve melting away to reveal such warmth and kindness. More people began filtering into the waiting room as morning turned to afternoon. Martha from the community center arrived with sandwiches and coffee. Pastor Jim came to sit with them for a while, offering quiet words of encouragement. Even some of Grace's teachers stopped by briefly. "The whole town's praying for her," Martha said softly, patting Daniel's shoulder. "We're all pulling for our Olivia. Our Olivia." The words brought fresh tears to Daniel's eyes. How quickly she'd become part of their community, their family. The thought of losing her now was unbearable. Grace stirred and woke, immediately looking around. "Is Aunt Liv okay? Did the doctor come?" "Not yet, honey," Daniel assured her. "But no news is good news. It means they're taking their time and being careful." They played cards to pass the time, though neither could focus much on the game. Grace drew more pictures in her journal. Daniel paced. The hands of the wall clock moved with agonizing slowness. 4 hours passed. 5, 6. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dr. Matthews appeared in the waiting room doorway. His surgical cap was off, and he looked tired but satisfied. Daniel's heart leaped into his throat as he stood, lifting Grace with him. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Dr. Matthews smiled. "The transplant was a complete success. Miss Sterling came through beautifully, and the new heart is already functioning well." Grace let out a squeal of joy, throwing her arms around Daniel's neck. He hugged her tightly, tears of relief streaming down his face. "When can we see her?" Grace asked eagerly. "She'll be in recovery for a few hours, doctor," Matthews explained. "Once she's moved to the ICU, you can visit briefly. She'll be very groggy from the anesthesia, but I'm sure she'll want to see you both." "Thank you," Daniel managed, his voice cracking with emotion. "Thank you so much." Martha and the others who'd stayed to wait crowded around, offering hugs and congratulations. Grace bounced with excitement, already planning get-well cards and decorations for Olivia's room. Daniel sank back into his chair, overwhelmed with gratitude. He closed his eyes and whispered a prayer of thanks, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. "Daddy?" Grace touched his arm. "Can we go to the gift shop and get Aunt Liv some flowers? Yellow ones are her favorite." "Of course, sweetheart." Daniel stood, taking her hand. As they walked toward the elevator, he glanced back at the doors leading to surgery. Beyond them, Olivia was beginning her journey of recovery, her new heart beating strong and steady with the promise of tomorrow. The fear and uncertainty of the past weeks began to lift, replaced by hope and joy. Their little family had faced its first major crisis together and emerged stronger. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them the same way, with faith, love, and the unshakable bond they'd forged. The late autumn breeze rustled through the trees lining Main Street as Olivia Sterling took her first steps back into town since her surgery 6 weeks ago. Her hand trembled slightly as she gripped her light jacket closer, but not from weakness, from the overwhelming emotion of seeing the familiar storefronts and faces that had become so dear to her. Mrs. Peterson from the bakery was the first to spot her. "Olivia! Oh, thank heavens!" The plump woman rushed forward, wiping flour-covered hands on her apron before wrapping Olivia in a gentle hug. "We've all been praying for you, dear." Word spread quickly through the small town. Within minutes, people emerged from shops and homes, gathering around her with warm smiles and tears of joy. Someone pressed a bouquet of fresh flowers into her hands. Another neighbor offered a carefully wrapped loaf of homemade bread. Each face held genuine care that still amazed her. These people who had known her such a short time now felt more like family than her own flesh and blood ever had. "You look wonderful," Sarah from the library said, squeezing her hand. "That new heart of yours must be full of love already." Olivia touched her chest, feeling the steady rhythm beneath. "It is," she whispered. "Thanks to all of you." Through the crowd, she spotted the community center where it had all begun. where a little girl's drawing had first cracked the walls around her heart, where a kind man's words had given her hope when she'd lost all of it. As if summoned by her thoughts, Grace's voice rang out. "Aunt Liv!" The 10-year-old darted through the crowd and threw herself carefully into Olivia's arms. "Daddy said you were coming today, but I didn't know when, and I've missed you so much." Olivia held the child close, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence. "I've missed you too, sweetheart, more than you know." When she looked up, Daniel stood a few feet away, watching them with an expression that made her heart, her new, strong heart, skip a beat. Their eyes met, and the world seemed to slow around them. "Welcome back," he said softly. The crowd, sensing the moment, began to disperse with knowing smiles and gentle pats on Olivia's shoulder. Soon, only the three of them remained on the sidewalk, bathed in golden afternoon light. "The center's been too quiet without you," Grace declared, taking Olivia's hand. "Nobody makes hot chocolate like you do." Daniel chuckled. "I seem to remember you saying my hot chocolate was the best just last week." "Well, that was before I remembered Aunt Liv's." Grace tugged them toward the community center. "Can we have some now, please?" Inside, everything was exactly as Olivia remembered. The mismatched furniture, the children's artwork on the walls, the slight squeak of the floorboards near the kitchen, but it felt different now, or perhaps she was the one who had changed. While Grace busied herself gathering mugs and marshmallows, Daniel and Olivia stood in comfortable silence by the window. The late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber. "The doctors say I'm healing faster than expected," Olivia said quietly. "They can hardly believe the difference in my test results." Daniel smiled. "Love is the best medicine. Is that what this is?" She turned to face him fully. "Love?" His expression grew serious, tender. "I think we both know it, Island." He took a step closer. "These past months, watching you with Grace, seeing how you've opened your heart to everyone in town, fighting alongside you." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I didn't expect to feel this way again after losing Sarah. I thought that part of my life was over." Olivia's breath caught. "Daniel, but you showed me that love isn't something you can put limits on. It grows where it wants to, when it wants to." He reached for her hand, his palm warm against hers. "I love you, Olivia Sterling. Not because you needed saving, but because you taught me how to live again too." Tears blurred Olivia's vision as she looked at their joined hands. "I was so afraid," she whispered. "Afraid of dying without ever knowing what this felt like. Real love, family, belonging." She squeezed his fingers. "And now I'm afraid of losing it." "You won't," Daniel said firmly. "You're stuck with us now." From the kitchen, they heard Grace humming as she stirred the hot chocolate, completely at peace with their world. Olivia looked up at Daniel, seeing all her hopes reflected in his eyes. "Then let's live every day as if it's all that matters," she whispered, accepting his hand and everything it promised. The school auditorium buzzed with excitement as parents and families filed in, clutching programs and searching for the best seats. Olivia Sterling sat between Daniel and Grace Carter in the third row, her heart, her new heart, beating steadily with joy as she watched Grace fidget in her concert dress. "Are you nervous, sweetheart?" Olivia asked, smoothing a wrinkle from Grace's powder blue dress. Grace's fingers twisted in her lap. "A little. What if I mess up the piano part?" "You've practiced so hard," Daniel said, giving his daughter's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Remember what we talked about. Just pretend you're playing at home for us." Olivia nodded, adding, "And we'll be right here in the audience, cheering you on." The transformation in Olivia's life over the past few months still felt miraculous. Gone was the hollow emptiness that had haunted her mansion. Instead, her days were filled with the warmth of family dinners, homework sessions with Grace, and quiet evening talks with Daniel on the porch swing. "5 minutes until places," called Mrs. Thompson, the music teacher, from the front of the auditorium. Grace jumped up, smoothing her dress one last time. "That's my cue." She hugged her father, then turned to embrace Olivia. "Love you both." As Grace scampered toward the stage door, Olivia felt tears prick at her eyes. Those simple words, "love you both," still had the power to overwhelm her with gratitude. Daniel's hand found hers in the dimming light, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "You okay?" he whispered. "More than okay," Olivia replied, squeezing his hand. "I just never imagined I'd be here, like this, part of a family." The lights dimmed further, and a hush fell over the audience as Mrs. Thompson stepped onto the stage. "Welcome everyone to our spring musical showcase." As other students performed their pieces, Olivia found herself studying the families around them. Parents leaned together, smartphones ready to record. Younger siblings squirmed in their seats. Such ordinary moments that she'd once observed from a distance, never believing they could be hers. Next up, Mrs. Thompson announced, Grace Carter, performing Moonlight Sonata on piano. Daniel sat up straighter, his grip on Olivia's hand tightening slightly. Grace appeared from the wings, her face serious as she approached the gleaming black piano. She sat, adjusted the bench, and took a deep breath. The first notes filled the auditorium, clear and confident. Olivia felt her chest swell with pride. She'd sat with Grace during countless practice sessions, watching those small fingers gain surety and strength. Now, as the melody soared, she remembered their first meeting at the community center, when Grace had offered her that crayon drawing a simple act of kindness that had changed everything. Daniel leaned close to whisper, She's never played it better. Olivia nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The music wrapped around them, each note a reminder of the precious gift of time she'd been given. Not just the physical gift of the heart beating in her chest, but the gift of love that had transformed her life. As Grace played the final chord, the audience burst into applause. Olivia and Daniel were on their feet instantly, clapping with unrestrained pride. Grace's face broke into a radiant smile as she stood to bow, her eyes finding them in the crowd. More students performed, but Olivia barely noticed them. Her mind kept returning to the journey that had brought her here, from that sterile doctor's office where she'd received her death sentence, to the community center where she'd found hope, through the darkness of her brother's rejection, and finally to the miracle of survival and acceptance. After the final performance, families began gathering their belongings. Grace appeared through the crowd, still glowing from her success. Did you see? I didn't mess up once. You were magnificent, Olivia said, pulling her close. Mom would have loved it, Grace said softly, looking up at Daniel. Daniel's eyes glistened as he nodded. Yes, she would have. And she'd be so proud of you, just like we are. The mention of Daniel's late wife no longer brought awkwardness or guilt. They'd learned to honor her memory while embracing their new family bonds. Grace had taught them that love multiplies rather than divides. As other families filed out, they remained in their seats, savoring the moment. Grace snuggled between them, humming snippets of her piece. The stage lights began to dim one by one, casting long shadows across the empty seats. Daniel's arm stretched behind Grace to rest on Olivia's shoulder. Should we celebrate with ice cream? Can we get hot fudge sundaes? Grace asked eagerly. I think that's the perfect way to celebrate such a wonderful performance, Olivia agreed. They stood together, hands naturally finding each other's in the growing darkness. As the last stage light faded, Olivia felt the steady rhythm of her heart, her new heart beating in perfect harmony with the love surrounding her. The thought came unbidden but true. I was given a new heart, but what I found was a new family. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Olivia Sterling, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.